Greetings. I'm Dr. Keisha Paxton, professor of psychology at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and I'm excited to talk to you today about how we can adapt to the new normal more than 2 years after the COVID-19 pandemic. So in today's presentation, we will normalize our current feelings about COVID-19 and this murky time period by reflecting on the pandemic and its relationship to where we are now, where we've been, and what we've been through. Then we'll discuss the COVID-19 pandemic and its relationship to burnout. And then we'll end by highlighting topics of connection and community and how these can help us adjust to where we're going. So let's just put it out on the table. So we're still unsure of where we are in this pandemic. As much as we would like for it to be over, the elephant in the room is COVID. It's still around, but things are different than they were in 2020 and even in 2021. So when I say the new normal, I mean adjusting to what we've been through and how we're going to get to our new sense of normalcy. So let's take a moment to reflect on what we've all been through with this pandemic. So we've been through a lot, and we're also busy. We really don't have time to stop and think about this really huge event that has impacted the lives of all of us, and not just impacted our lives, but drastically changed our lives. So to briefly reflect, at first we were all confused when COVID hit the scene, and we were looking for information and clear answers, and those answers took a while to get. And then there was the stay-at-home order, which was a huge impact on all of us, and it lasted a lot longer than any of us expected. And then there was social distancing and masks that entered our lives. And then vaccines were introduced, and that brought a lot of fervor. And a lot has gone on since March 2020. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. And adding more to the context of how the pandemic has affected us, here are some stats. So there were a lot of cases of COVID reported, and you may have been among those cases. In the United States, there have been over 81 million cases reported and over 9 million cases in California and over 2.8 million cases reported in Los Angeles County to date. And in California, there have been over 160 million COVID tests administered. And then there's also the impact on jobs, with 3 million fewer people employed now than before the pandemic. And mental health was impacted as well, as we saw a 25% increase in the diagnoses of depression and anxiety worldwide during the first year of the pandemic. And we also know that women and young people were most impacted. So we need to acknowledge what we've been through, including the losses. Many of us lost loved ones, and it's a lot. So we've lost a lot during this time period, and it's important to acknowledge that. And we've been through it together. So while the pandemic impacted each of us differently, and it's something that has changed all of our worlds, the pandemic is a unifying factor. It's something that we can all relate to because we've all been through it. And while we've each had our own unique experiences of it, and some had it much worse than others, it's something we can all say we've experienced. Now that we've set the context to what we've been through and acknowledge that it's been tough, to say the least, let's switch to talking about well-being. And I'm all about positivity and wellness, and that's what I want to bring to you today. So first, let's talk about what contributes to well-being. It includes, but is not limited to, social connection, mental health, and physical health. And each of these were impacted by the pandemic. Social distancing and physical distancing impacted our social connectedness. And for many cultures, social connection and physical touch are an integral part of the culture. It's how we interact. So things like shaking hands and hugging to greet people are part of the culture. And being physically apart and told to not touch and to wear a mask impacted the well-being of many of us. The mask literally mask our facial expressions, which is another way in which we connect. So physical distancing and wearing masks, it brought us down and made us feel less connected. Now, the stress of the pandemic, figuring out work and childcare and elder care impacted our mental health, and our physical health was impacted by COVID itself. Perhaps you got COVID and it impacted your physical health, but also things like being at home more and perhaps not moving as much and eating more, perhaps overworking, not being as active. These are things that impacted our physical health. In fact, there was one study that looked at young people ages 13 to 20 and found that during the pandemic, they were snacking more, eating fewer regular meals like breakfast, for example, as compared to before the pandemic. And they also reported more sleep problems during the pandemic. Now, I'm sure these findings are not surprising to you because you may have experienced changes in your eating or sleeping or other activities during the pandemic and are trying to find your way to your new normal. So we've talked about well-being and what contributes to it. Now I want to talk about burnout. And it's a topic that has been brought up a lot in various ways during the pandemic. So let's talk about it. The concept of burnout is usually discussed with respect to the workplace. So it's discussed as a response to workplace stress that has not been sufficiently managed, according to the definition provided by the World Health Organization. And it's characterized by these three main things. So feeling extremely exhausted, fatigued, depleted, worn out, cynicism and detachment. So things like negative attitudes about work, your coworkers, clients, and withdrawing and irritability. And lastly, loss of effectiveness. So reduced productivity, diminished work products, low morale. And I see all of these things collectively as mustering what little energy you have, just so you can go through the motions and make it through the day. And everybody is exhausted about COVID. We're over it. We're tired of talking about it, tired of dealing with it. We're all ready to move on. So this negativity and desire to detach from it, that's part of feeling that burnout over COVID. So I want to talk to you about contributors to burnout, and some you may be able to identify with. So things like feeling a lack of control, challenging or stressful situations at work, lack of social support, or feeling isolated or lonely, and not finding harmony between your work life and your personal life. Now, if we pause and look at these four contributors of burnout, these are all things that we experienced during the pandemic and may still be experiencing. And when we look at where we currently are with the context of COVID, there are some things that might be contributing to pandemic related stress. So things like these new variants that keep popping up and our feelings of lack of control and confusion about what is the status of COVID at the current time. Other things like our workplace situations. So your situation at work may be very different than it was pre-pandemic. Some people may still be working at home. Some may have gone back to work. And whatever your situation is, you may have mixed feelings about your work situation. And these things contribute to workplace dynamics and work-life imbalance. And we're still unclear on where we are with the pandemic. Are we still in it? Are we emerging from it? How do we gather? How do we even greet people? Are we shaking hands? Are we hugging? Are we fist bumping? Are we waving? Still a lot of confusion. And that lack of clarity contributes to how we engage with others and our social support. And so that can also lead to a feeling of lack of control and work-life imbalance. One thing to remember is that we've all experienced this whole unique time period together, and we are in community with one another around this very unusual experience. So I offer you the 4 C's for adjusting to the new normal after COVID, or as we progress through the pandemic. So the first C is collective experience. The second C is for control. The third C is for community. And the fourth C, that's going to stay a secret for a little longer. So a little suspense for you. Let's start with the first C. We all need to acknowledge that we've been through a collective trauma. And it's unfair for us to expect things to be normal like they were pre-pandemic, because we're all different now. We've all grown, we're all stronger. And so one, it's important for us to recognize that we've grown and recognize that others have grown too. But we want to be fair to ourselves and not necessarily have the same thoughts or expectations post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic. The second C is for control. So the pandemic caused us to feel a lack of control. So as we are emerging from the restrictions of the pandemic and the feeling of a lack of control is starting to decrease, it can help to recognize the things you can control and embrace them. And feeling a sense of control can give you quick wins and increase your feeling of effectiveness and agency. And this can help to combat the feeling we've all felt over the past 2+ years, experiencing these various mandates. We've had mask mandates. Perhaps you've experienced settings where you had vaccine mandates. We all have the stay-at-home mandate. So a lot of these mandates contribute to feelings of stress. And so one way to combat this is focusing on what you can control. And one thing you can control is how you take care of yourself. And we're under stress, so we might fall into bad habits like eating more or moving less. And so you want to take care of yourself. So one thing that you can control is how you take care of you. Now, the third C is for community. And we need our social connections. These build a sense of community and belonging. They help us feel less alone, and people are missing the social connections that we had before the pandemic. Now, if you're feeling reluctant to reach out to people and spend time, be brave and be the one to initiate that. People will appreciate it, and meet in a way that you're comfortable with. So it can be physically distant, it can be outdoors, it can even be virtual, because I don't think virtual meetings are going anywhere. And also be prepared for a little awkwardness as we start to reconnect. It's still a weird time. And if you're feeling like your social skills are a little rusty, don't worry. Everybody is feeling that way. And everybody's trying to get back to that previous comfort level. And we'll all get better with time and practice. And the final C to help us as we adjust to the new normal is Carson. So I'm talking about Carson, for one, because we're at the Carson Mental Health Forum. And I love Carson. I grew up in Carson. I even work in Carson. I think it's great, right? Carson offers a lot of resources to help us adjust to the new normal. And the resources that they provide all relate to issues that I brought up in this talk about the context of the pandemic and the 4 C's that would help us adjust to the new normal. So here are just a few. So things like sports and exercise classes to increase physical activity, and those are offered through the Parks and Rec Department. The city also offers enrichment classes for all ages, so things like music and dance and technology. And there are groups to promote social interaction, that social interaction that we've been missing. So they have things like senior clubs, and they have events, all kinds of great events to promote well-being, like this one that you're attending. They also have teen nights. They have a jazz festival and other big events to bring back the fun that we've all been missing and yearning for. So I want to wrap up with two questions to ask yourself as you think about this unusual time and as we transition to what is next. Make sure you're giving yourself grace. It is unfair to expect everything to be like it was pre-pandemic. And we're calling it the new normal for a reason, because it's different than what we knew before. So be kind to yourself and to others as we adjust. And secondly, make sure you're taking care of yourself and take care of the self you are now, not the pre-pandemic self, but the self you are now. And make sure that you're getting what you need. Which brings us back to the 4 C's for adjusting to the new normal. So recognize that we've all been through a collective experience where we often felt a lack of control. So control what you can, including taking care of yourself, and utilize your community to reestablish connections and build new ones. And it might be a little uncomfortable at first, and that's okay. And utilize your city's resources. Like Carson, it has a lot to offer. And thank you for your time. That concludes my talk. And these are some ways to keep in touch with me. Take care.